Welcome back, night watchers, to Nakora Nights. Pennsylvania is full of towns that look abandoned, but some of them were never truly empty. Old coal streets swallowed by fog, houses frozen in time, and silence so heavy it feels like it's watching you. Tonight, we're stepping into 10 true Pennsylvania ghost town horror stories. Real encounters from places erased from maps, but not from memory. Lights turning on in buildings with no electricity. Voices echoing through mine shafts long sealed shut, and figures standing in second-story windows, even though there are no stairs left inside. These aren't stories made for entertainment. They're warnings from the people who went looking and found something still living there. Before we enter these forgotten towns, tell me, where are you watching from right now? And what time is it where you are? Because if it's late, abandoned places have a way of remembering you. If you're brave enough to walk streets no one should return to, hit like, subscribe, and comment below. I hear the echoes. Now, slow your footsteps. Don't look into dark windows for too long. And whatever you hear behind you, don't turn around. This is 10 Untold Most Disturbing True Pennsylvania Ghost Town Horror Stories. Let's begin. I knew something was wrong. The night the silence felt heavier than the air itself, pressing against my skin as if trying to warn me. I had been working the late shift at a 24-hour fuel station on the far edge of a small forgotten area outside Philadelphia, a place that felt more like a ghost hanging off the city than a real town. People called it Backline, a name as worn and tired as the streets that twisted through it. I had been here almost 3 years, trying to save money for school, trying to stay invisible. I thought Backline would be quiet enough to let me breathe. I was wrong. My name is Nathan. I never expected my life to turn into a story people would whisper about, but even now when I remember, my hands shake. The things that happened in Backline still live inside me, and I can hear them sometimes when the lights flicker. I used to believe only people made bad choices. I did not know an entire place could hide evil. I did not know a town could watch you the way hunters watch a wounded animal. Most nights were slow, with only a few lonely drivers or night workers stopping for snacks or cheap coffee. I liked the stillness because it let me study for my online classes. But there was one man who came almost every night at about 2:10 a.m. His name was Hartley, a thin older man with coal-black stains on his fingers, a reminder of the mines that shut down years ago. He was always friendly, and for a brief moment each night I felt like someone else existed in the dark with me. He would buy the same things, a pack of Reds, a scratch card, and a large coffee. We talked about weather, old sports games, the way Backline was dying piece by piece. His voice felt safe. His presence felt like habit. Then one night he simply did not come. At first I did not think much of it. People change routines, people get sick, people move on. But as a week passed, something inside me kept tugging, a tight fear I could not shake. I asked around when locals came in. Most shrugged. One woman stared at me like I was strange for even asking. It bothered me more than it should have. The town acted like no one mattered unless they needed something from them. 3 weeks passed. I called the non-emergency line. The officer sounded annoyed, like I had interrupted a break. She told me adults can go wherever they want, no report, no panic. I hung up feeling smaller than before, my worry pressing deeper into my bones. One cold October night, when my shift ended at 3, I found myself driving toward Hartley's neighborhood, an old block of sagging houses near train tracks that no longer worked. His home sat behind a leaning fence at the end of a cracked road that led straight toward abandoned mine tunnels. I had been there once when he forgot his wallet. This time, the house was dark, still, wrong. Newspapers piled on the porch like no one had touched them in weeks. I knocked. No answer. The doorknob was locked. I walked around and peered through a kitchen window. Everything untouched, dusty, quiet. My heart thumped hard. Something terrible had happened. I could feel it, cold as ice. I turned from the house, unsure what to do next, when I noticed a slim path through the yard, grass flattened as if someone had walked that way many times. It stretched toward a rusted fence and the mine entrance behind it. The air felt colder there, too cold for the night. I lifted my phone, turned on the flashlight, and followed the path even though everything inside me begged me to stop. But fear mixed with duty, and I kept going. The mine entrance yawned like a mouth carved into the hill. The warning signs were unreadable, eaten by rust. I stepped through a gap in the fence and felt damp air wrap around me, heavy and sour. My light caught a shape on the ground, a shoe half buried in dirt. A worn work boot, Hartley's kind. My breath hitched. My legs moved on their own. Inside the mine, the walls squeezed close, wet and cold. Water dripped somewhere far back, echoing like a heartbeat. My steps scraped along old stone. I moved slowly, shining my weak light ahead, feeling like the darkness was pushing back. Minutes felt like hours. My battery dropped fast. I almost turned around when my light caught another boot, and then torn fabric hanging off broken rock. My throat tightened, fear burning like hot sand. Still I kept going. The tunnel widened into a chamber and the smell hit me first, thick and rotten. My light trembled as I raised it. Bodies, not one. Many, some bones only, some bones only. Some swollen and pale. I stumbled back, almost falling. My stomach turned, my eyes fixed on a figure slumped against the far wall. Hartley, silent, gone, with a dark wound near his temple. I tasted metal in my mouth. Panic swallowed me whole. I do not remember leaving. I do not remember reaching my car or driving back. My mind only remembers the feeling that I had stepped into something I was not meant to see. I called from the station parking lot. Officers arrived slowly, acting like I had exaggerated everything. But when they followed me into the mine, they found everything exactly as I said. The town erupted in fear, though many pretended they had nothing to fear. The investigation dragged for months. They could not find fingerprints or DNA, no witnesses, no suspect. They discovered records deeper in the mine. Notes, lists, schedules. Someone had been planning these killings for years. Someone watching lonely men, someone patient. Police questioned me many times. They were careful, but I could see the annoyance behind their eyes. They blamed me for disturbing the crime scene. I did not care. I wanted truth, but Backline was a place where truth drowned in silence. I began having nightmares. I dreamed I was trapped underground. I dreamed Hartley reached for me with empty eyes. My grades slipped. I stopped talking to people. I wanted to quit the job, but something held me there, like duty or guilt or fear, that leaving meant forgetting the victims. So I stayed. 3 months later, a stranger walked in a little after 2. Tall, thin, skin pale like paper. His eyes were too still, too cold. He held my gaze a little too long. I felt something crawl down my spine. He bought water and chips. He smiled, slow and wrong. Then walked out into the dark. My hands shook. I checked the cameras, zoomed in, saved the file, sent it to the detective. The next day he called back. They were looking. No name, no trail. The man used cash. His license plate was blocked by mud. Nothing solid. Something inside me screamed that he was connected. I could not shake the feeling. Nights became torture. Every customer felt suspicious. I wrote notes of strange behavior. I watched shadows move in the parking lot even when no one was there. My mind twisted tighter every day. Sleep became rare. The darkness felt alive. Backline changed too. People talked less. People watched more. Rumors spread but died quickly, almost like someone was smothering them. Some workers at the old chemical plant whispered about sickness, about strange side effects from the air. Some said the whole town depended on the plant, even though it might be poisoning them. Silence felt like survival, but silence also felt like the thing that let the killer walk free. One driver told me something strange one night. He said people in Backline always seemed to know things about him. Private things, things he never shared. I felt chills because I had noticed the same. Locals called me by my mother's name once, a name I never told anyone. Another time someone mentioned my birthday before I ever said it. I brushed it off then. Now I wondered how they knew. The unease grew into dread. Weeks later, one night, the lights inside the station flickered again and again. I felt watched. I felt the air shift, like someone was behind me. I turned. No one, but the cameras showed movement. A shadow by the entrance, taller than any customer I remembered. It stood still for 2 minutes, unmoving, then vanished. I told the detective. He said the angle was unclear. Nothing useful, nothing helpful. I realized they had stopped believing me. Maybe they never believed me. Maybe Backline did not want this truth uncovered. Maybe everyone knew more than they said. I learned more history of the town from an older man who came by sometimes. He worked the mines decades ago. He said Backline had always been a strange place, a place where secrets lived longer than people. He said the tunnels ran deep under everything, older than the coal industry, older than records. He said people went missing long before the first mine opened. He said the town had a way of swallowing things. I did not want to hear more. Every shift felt like waiting for something to strike. My nerves burned. My chest felt tight. One night when the fog was thick around the station, I saw a figure near the fence, tall, thin, still, watching me. I blinked and it was gone. But I knew it had been there. People inside the town began avoiding me. Conversation stopped when I walked by. Doors closed quickly. Whispers followed me. I felt like Backline itself wanted me to leave or disappear. The detective eventually told me the investigation into the mine deaths was slowing down. Not enough evidence. No clear suspect. No more leads. They sealed the mine with concrete. Another truth buried. I finished my online classes somehow, barely sleeping. I packed up and left Backline one morning before sunrise. I did not say goodbye. I did not want anyone to know I was leaving. The town looked calm as I drove away, but I felt eyes watching me from every window. Years passed. But the memory never left. Sometimes I dream of tunnels. Sometimes I smell damp earth. Sometimes I feel that smile from the stranger curling through my mind. Once I saw a man on the street in another city. He looked just like the man from the station. He looked at me as if to say he remembered. Maybe he followed me. Maybe he never needed Backline. Maybe he lived in the quiet spaces between people and fear. Sometimes I wonder if he came from those tunnels or if he helped create them. Sometimes I wonder if the whole town was part of something unseen, something that fed on silence, something that watched people until they slipped away. I still think of Hartley. I still think of the men who vanished before him. I wonder if any of us ever had a chance. I wonder if Backline marked us the moment we stepped inside it. The questions stay with me, sharp and cold. There are no answers. Only shadows. Because some horrors do not stop. Some killers do not quit. Some places do not forget. And some eyes follow you long after you escape. Sometimes danger grows when people stay silent, so speaking up can save lives. Trusting your instincts matters, because ignoring them can lead to harm. Communities must care for one another, or darkness can hide in plain sight. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is choosing to act even when afraid. I felt the cold first, the kind that slips under clothes and settles against your bones, the kind that warns you something is already watching. That was the night everything started, the night my life bent in a direction I never chose and could never undo. My name is Rylan, and I grew up on the far edge of Pittsburgh, where the hills turn wild and the roads twist toward old woods that look older than the city itself. My family had lived out there for almost a century, long enough for stories to cling to the land like fog, long enough for the people in town to pretend they did not see the things they whispered about after dark. My great-grandfather had built the old farmhouse by hand, and every generation after him stayed close, tending the land, raising animals, living quiet lives. I used to think that kind of life meant safety, but I learned fast that quiet places just hide louder monsters. I had worked as a field medic for years before I burned out, so I came back home telling everyone I needed a slower life, telling myself I needed to breathe. I ran a small clinic in town, patching up kids from bike crashes, farm workers with cuts, old folks with aches. People smiled at me, trusted me, thanked me. It seemed peaceful. It wasn't. It started on a late autumn night, the air sharp with wood smoke from chimneys and the brittle smell of dying leaves. I left the clinic at almost 2:13 a.m., exhausted, the kind of tired that makes everything feel heavier. The drive home wound through thick forest, the trees leaning overhead like they wanted to swallow the road. I had driven that road thousands of times, slow and careful, watching for deer. But that night something moved across the road so fast I slammed the brakes before I even knew I had reacted. The truck skidded on gravel, shuddered to a stop, and my heart hammered hard enough to shake my ribs. I waited for a deer to run off, or a raccoon or anything. But the road was empty. The forest was silent. My headlights stretched across black nothing. I told myself I imagined the shape, the height, the speed. I hated how unsure my own brain felt, how easily the darkness distorted everything into something worse. I forced myself to keep driving, though every few seconds I checked my mirrors, certain I was not alone. When I pulled into my driveway, everything looked normal. Porch light on, house quiet, barn sitting in shadow like it had for decades. I stepped out and felt the air shift, tense and strange, but I told myself I was tired. I went to check the animals. I only kept a few goats, some chickens, and one old horse named Scout. They were usually calm at night, almost bored with routine, but when I opened the barn door, they panicked at the sound. Goats huddled tight in one corner. Chickens fluttered like a storm was passing over. Scout stomped and thrashed, eyes wide, muscles trembling. Nothing attacked them. Nothing moved, but something had been there. I felt it like a hand brushing the back of my neck. I stayed in the barn almost an hour, calming them, speaking low, letting them smell that I was there and they were safe. But the whole time I kept looking at the doorway, waiting for something tall to fill the frame. The next morning, the rooster crowed like normal, but when I walked toward the barn, everything stopped. The air felt wrong again. Mud near the door held deep prints, too large for a dog, too narrow for a bear, too long for any animal that should walk on four legs. Each print was the size of my hand, with claw marks carving through the mud. They came from the tree line, circled the barn, stopped at a weak part of the wall. Fresh scratches dug deep into the old wood, like something tested the structure, learning how to get in. I took pictures, my hands shaking even though the morning sun was bright. I called Marcus, my neighbor, an old wildlife officer who had grown up there and knew the woods better than anyone. When he arrived, he crouched by the prints and stared too long. His face tightened. His jaw worked like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost like he hoped the trees wouldn't hear. He told me he had seen prints like that once when he was still working. He told me he never found what made them. He told me people called them misidentified wolf tracks, but he knew better. He said to keep the animals inside at night. He said not to walk alone after dark. He said it with a weight that scared me more than the prints. Over the next few weeks, the nights grew colder and the sense of being watched grew heavier. My motion lights flashed on at random hours, lighting up the yard in harsh white beams, but every time I checked, nothing stood there, nothing moved, nothing breathed, except I could feel it. The animals stayed restless. Scout refused to leave the barn. The goats slept piled together as though hiding from a storm. The chickens barely made sound. Then one morning I found one of my goats dead in the far pasture, torn open. Not eaten clean like a predator kill, mauled. Violent, wrong. The ground around it churned with the same massive prints. The wildlife officer who came out said bear. He said drought pushed them closer. He said other farms had seen signs too. But his eyes didn't match his words. He left fast, like he did not want to be there any longer than needed. I lost another goat 2 weeks later, then another. I started sleeping in the barn some nights, rifle on my lap, waiting for the thing that circled my land. Sleep turned to scraps. Food tasted like dust. Silence grew loud enough to drown out everything else. I set up trail cameras along the tree line. Most nights, they caught nothing. Sometimes they caught the animals running in panic, fleeing shadows. And once, just once, they caught a blurred shape, tall enough to stand above the fence, moving upright. Around that same time, strange things began happening in town. A teenager who volunteered at my clinic told me people were forgetting someone who lived on his street. He said an old woman disappeared, and the neighbors acted like she never existed. He said her mailbox was still there, her curtains still hanging, but everyone insisted her house had been empty for years. A nurse I knew whispered that the patients who complained at the hospital were suddenly transferred, then never mentioned again. Rooms cleared out overnight. Paperwork vanished. Families stopped asking questions. And I found something even worse. A box of old photos in my attic had pictures of me as a child standing in places I did not remember. Beside people I had never seen. In woods that didn't look like the woods near my home, but the date stamp said I was 5, then 7, then 9. Same clothes I remembered wearing at that age. Same haircut. Different world behind me. I tried to ignore it. I tried to pretend it was someone else, but the child in the photos stared forward with my same eyes. All these things settled inside me, twisting, tightening, making every breath feel thinner. Then came the night everything changed. I woke around 3:08 a.m. to the sound of Scout screaming. A sound I didn't know a horse could make, raw and terrified. I grabbed the rifle, ran outside, and the cold bit me hard as I stepped onto the porch. The motion lights flashed on, the yard burst into light. And at the edge of the property, beyond the fence, something stood, tall, upright, almost 7 feet, maybe more. Covered in dark fur that looked wet in the light, head shaped like a wolf but longer, sharper, shoulders broad, arms too long. Claws curved like tools made for ripping. Its eyes glowed greenish yellow, steady, focused, aware. It was studying me. I tried to lift the rifle, but my hands shook too hard. My body froze, trapped between fear and disbelief. The creature didn't move. It didn't snarl. It just watched, breathing slow, controlled, like it knew exactly how much power it held. Then it turned, smooth and quiet, and slipped back into the forest. No branch cracked. No leaf rustled. It moved like a shadow leaving its place. I waited until sunrise before I stepped off the porch. At the fence, I found fresh tufts of fur snagged on wire. Thick, coarse. Unlike anything I had ever touched. I took the fur to a university biologist. He tested it, studied it, ran scans. When he called me back, he sounded unsure, almost scared. He said the fur did not match any animal known in North America. He said the structure looked almost like a hybrid that shouldn't exist. He refused to say more. He told me he could not identify it and maybe should not try. That night I went home with the worst feeling I had ever known, the sense that the world was larger and darker than I ever understood. Weeks passed. Snow came, and the creature returned whenever it wanted, leaving prints, scratching walls, killing animals, reminding me it was nearby. Something else changed too. Townspeople stopped talking to me. Some looked away, some looked through me. Like I was fading, like they were forgetting me the way they forgot others. One night I found my own mailbox empty, not unusual. But then the next night it was gone entirely. Post dug out. Mailbox removed. When I asked the post office, they said I had never been registered at that address. I had lived there my entire life. Memory bent around me like warped metal, and the creature kept coming, and the town grew stranger, and nothing felt real anymore. The breaking point came in late winter. I heard footsteps outside around 2:51 a.m. Slow, heavy, almost testing the ground. I looked out the window and saw its massive shape standing near the barn. Except it wasn't looking at the animals. It was looking at my house. I grabbed the rifle again, heart beating so loud it felt like thunder in my ears. I stepped outside, breathing cold air that stung my lungs, and the creature turned its glowing eyes toward me. But this time, something was different. Its head tilted. Its shoulders shifted. It stepped forward, closer to the house, closer to me, as though the distance between us meant nothing. I raised the gun. My hands shook. My breath fogged in front of me. The creature took another step. Then everything went silent. No wind, no animals, no sound at all. Just a stillness so complete it felt wrong. Then the creature stopped. It turned sharply toward the woods, bristled, and stepped back as though something deeper in the forest called it. Without hesitation, it vanished into the trees. That silence stayed behind. I never saw it again after that night. But I still find the prints. I still hear sounds in the woods. I still see motion lights flash for no reason. And sometimes, when darkness settles across the yard, I feel watched again. I learned something through all of this, something heavier than fear. Some places swallow truths. Some towns erase memories. Some creatures move through the cracks of what people believe, hidden because no one dares to look directly at them. And I think the creature wasn't hunting me, not yet. I think it was waiting. One day it might return. One day it might step out of the woods again, standing tall in the cold night, watching like it did before. And when it does, I know it will come closer. I know it will not hesitate, and I know I will not escape it this time. Sometimes the quiet places we trust the most hide the dangers we fear the least. And when a town chooses to forget the truth, the shadows only grow stronger. Small warnings ignored always turn into bigger horrors, because evil never arrives all at once. It arrives in quiet steps we pretend not to see. And in the end, not everything that watches us wants to stay unseen, because some things return the moment we act like they never existed at all. I never planned to return to Allentown, yet life has a way of pushing you back to places you tried to forget, places that wait for you like something alive, something patient. I drove into the town on a cold, gray morning, the sky low and heavy, as if the clouds were thinking about crushing the ground. I came because my grandmother, a woman I had barely known, left me her house. I had not seen her in years, not because of anger, but because distance stretches people apart, then time snaps the rope completely. She had lived most of her life in one of the old neighborhoods on the east side. Narrow streets lined with houses that leaned toward one another as if whispering secrets from the past. My name is Marcus, and this is the part of my life I still struggle to understand. Her house stood near the edge of a forgotten block, where people walked fast and spoke softly, pretending everything was normal when nothing was normal at all. Factories had closed, jobs had vanished, and yet everyone acted proud, as if unemployment was a word that did not belong in Allentown. Still, I could feel something desperate slipping through the air, quiet but sharp like the smell of metal during a storm. When I parked the car, the house looked smaller than I remembered, its roof sagging, its white paint now the color of old bones. The porch tilted slightly, as if the house was bowing before some unseen weight. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air felt trapped, thick and unmoving, filled with dust that floated like pale insects. Furniture stood under white sheets, giving everything a ghost-like shape. I moved through the rooms slowly, touching surfaces with care, feeling as if something watched me. The kitchen looked old but usable. The living room held piles of old magazines, and the upstairs bedrooms were crowded with boxes. My grandmother had been a collector of everything except people. I almost skipped the basement, thinking it would be more of the same, but curiosity pulled me down the narrow wooden stairs. I reached the bottom and pulled a chain hanging from the ceiling. A weak yellow light came on, shaking slightly as if afraid. The basement had concrete walls and patches of dirt floor, and the smell of mold made the air sting. I turned to leave, but a strange detail caught my eye. A section of the far wall had a different color, like it had been patched quickly and forgotten. Something in me refused to walk away. I touched the wall, and the surface felt wrong, lighter somehow. When I pressed harder, the panel moved. It slid open with a soft scrape, revealing a narrow passage that led into darkness. My heart jumped, but I forced myself forward, raising my phone to scatter its flashlight across the hidden room. It was small, no bigger than a walk-in closet, but my breath still caught. Wooden shelves filled every wall. Old journals, glass jars containing dried herbs, cracked photographs, newspaper clippings, and objects that looked older than the house itself filled the room. In the center sat a wooden table, and on it rested a dusty journal open to a page written in handwriting that I recognized. My grandmother's. The entry carried the date March 14th, 1976. More than 40 years earlier. My skin tightened as I read. She wrote about strange things happening in the house, about waking in different rooms without knowing how she got there, about hearing voices that came from yesterday or next year, whispers that curled through the walls and touched her while she slept. She wrote about seeing people who were not alive anymore or not alive yet. Objects vanished and returned in places that defied sense. I kept reading, my heart thudding. At the bottom of the page, she listed 5 names. 3 belonged to people I had heard stories about, locals who had vanished without explanation. The other 2 names meant nothing to me, yet seeing them in her writing filled me with dread I could not explain. Then I saw the last name, written in darker ink as if added later. My own name. The date under it matched the exact day I stood in that room. I dropped the journal. Fear rose through me like water climbing a well, cold and unstoppable. I forced myself to pick the journal up and flip through more pages. Dozens of entries described the same strange bending of time. My grandmother had documented everything with care, not skipping a single detail. She found journals left by the previous owner, who had also experienced the same thing, and the owner before that, stretching back over a century. Every owner of the house had added a journal to this collection. Every owner had seen things. Every owner had lost something. Some entries described people from town who vanished without explanation. One journal from 1924 told of a young woman who disappeared, only to be seen walking through the house on a night decades later, confused and terrified before she faded like smoke. Another entry described a man who vanished after visiting the house, then reappeared 3 days later in the woods outside town, barefoot and unable to recall a single moment. The journals hinted that the house stood on land once part of a burial ground, a place where time did not behave like time should. Whatever force lived beneath the soil did not forget. The house was a doorway. The house swallowed moments and returned them in the wrong order. Hours passed before I realized the sun had set. I carried several journals upstairs to read in better light. As I reached the top step, I heard footsteps above me, slow and deliberate. My body froze. Someone was in the house. My first thought was a break-in, but the front door was still locked, and no windows were open. I moved silently through each room on the first floor, but nothing looked touched. The upstairs hallway stretched before me like a throat. All the doors were closed. My pulse beat in my ears as I opened each door. Empty rooms, still air, untouched dust. I almost convinced myself it was just old house noise until footsteps echoed again, but this time from downstairs. I swallowed hard and walked to the top of the basement stairs. The light below glowed faintly. Everything looked the same until I saw footprints across the dusty floor. Fresh prints. Not mine. The footprints led straight to the hidden room. I followed them, each step heavier than the last. When I reached the room, the journal I had dropped earlier was no longer where I left it. It now sat neatly on the table, open to a fresh page. My grandmother's handwriting again. The date was today. The message was short. She wrote that she knew I would come, that the house remembered me, that time did not move forward here. It circled like a wounded animal, and that I was now inside its circle. I ran. I locked the basement door and left the house before I could think. I drove back to my apartment and threw myself into work to drown the memories, but nothing helped. For days, I could not sleep. Strange dreams twisted into my mind. I walked through the house in my sleep, searching for something that stayed in the shadows. I heard voices whispering from the walls, calling my name with different tones, as if versions of me from other years were answering. When I finally sat down to study the journals, I noticed a terrible pattern. Every March 14th, the strange events grew stronger. People vanished. Objects appeared where they did not belong. Time slipped and tangled. I found entries from multiple decades describing the same thing. Some wrote that the house did not want company, it wanted witnesses. Some wrote that they felt watched even when alone. Some wrote that they heard their own footsteps behind them. I began to see things too. A shadow standing at the corner of my apartment, silent and waiting. a reflection in a window that did not match my movements. My phone ringing at 2:30 a.m., only to hear faint breathing on the other end. When I returned to Allentown to meet with a real estate agent, I noticed something else. People looked away from me too quickly. Conversations stopped when I walked into stores. A family moved into the neighborhood weeks earlier, and they tried to act like everything was fine, but I saw the fear in their eyes. They smiled as if paid to smile, never mentioned the missing work that no one in town admitted existed, and yet their desperation leaked from their tight, tired faces. I tried to sell the house. Every buyer backed out with odd excuses. One said he felt someone touching his arm when no one was near. Another said the house seemed to breathe. Another never returned my calls, and days later news spread that he vanished while driving home. Police said he must have left town, but no one believed it. I hired a demolition crew. They walked inside for 5 minutes and refused to return. One worker claimed he heard a voice whisper his name from inside the walls. Another said he saw a figure standing on the stairway, but when he looked again, it was gone. The house wanted to stay. I tried to seal the basement door with concrete. When I returned 2 days later, the door stood wide open, the concrete broken as if someone dug through it with bare hands. My name appeared on a new page in a journal I did not remember opening. I felt watched everywhere I went. My therapist, my employer, and even the pastor from my grandmother's old church somehow knew about my panic attacks before I told anyone. They asked questions that sounded rehearsed. They gave advice that felt coordinated. Their eyes stayed on me too long. I realized they shared my information with one another, not because they wanted to help, but because they feared what the house connected me to. One night, while driving home from work, I saw a broken billboard on the side of the highway. The wood splintered and the paint peeled, but the message on it made my stomach flip. It described a fear I had told no one, a private fear about disappearing without a trace. I shook my head and drove on. But when I reached another exit, the same billboard appeared again, in the same broken shape, with different words describing another fear I kept hidden. I drove faster, my hands sweating on the wheel, yet the billboard kept showing up in town after town, always rewritten with something I never said aloud. I stopped telling people anything. The house waited. I felt it every night in my dreams. The journals whispered to me, pages flipped on their own. I heard footsteps in my apartment even when no one else lived there. Something walked around my bed at night, stopping sometimes to breathe slowly near my face. March 14th approached. I tried to leave town, but my car refused to start. A mechanic checked it and found nothing wrong. I rented a car, but the rental office canceled the reservation without explanation. I booked a bus ticket, but the bus broke down before it reached Allentown. Everything pushed me back toward the place I feared. On the night of March 13th, at 7:45 p.m., I woke on the floor of my living room, though I did not remember falling asleep. Dirt covered my shoes. Dust clung to my hands. I checked my pockets and found an old brass key I had never seen before. I knew what it belonged to. I drove to the house without deciding to. My hands moved on the wheel as if controlled by memory, not my own. The streets were empty. The air felt tight. When I stepped inside the house, the door closed behind me without a sound. I walked through the rooms slowly, each one darker than I remembered. Shadows pooled in corners like ink. The basement door stood open even though I locked it days ago. I walked down the stairs, my breath shallow. The light flickered. The footprints were there again, fresh and small, leading to the hidden room. When I entered, every journal lay open, their pages fluttering even though the air was still. My grandmother's voice echoed softly, calling my name, but from different directions, like she was everywhere and nowhere at once. The table in the center held a new journal, blank except for the first line. It said my story was not finished. I felt something behind me. When I turned, the passage was gone. Only darkness remained. The house had swallowed the doorway. The room felt smaller. Time bent inward. I heard footsteps circling me, slow and steady. The journals glowed faintly, their words shifting. I felt pulled into something deeper than fear, something that wrapped around my bones. I realized then that the house did not just twist time. It wanted people, it wanted stories, it wanted witnesses added to the pattern. My grandmother had been trapped. Others had been trapped, and now I understood why the house left my name in journals written before I existed. It had been waiting. The floor shook gently like a heartbeat. The shelves trembled. The air rippled. Something touched my shoulder, soft at first, then firm, guiding me toward the table. I picked up the blank journal. My hands moved on their own, writing my name on the next page. The room darkened, yet the page glowed. I heard the voices of the missing. They whispered around me, calling out from years that did not line up. I felt myself slipping, not falling, but drifting away from the moment I stood in. I saw futures I did not choose and pasts I never lived. The house remembered everything. The house always remembered. When the ground shifted under my feet and the shelves blurred, I understood that I was not standing in the basement anymore, not in the year I believed. I was somewhere between what happened and what would happen. Somewhere the house kept its secrets. I do not know how long I have been here. Time folds. Days vanish. I write because the journal insists I write. I feel others near me, lost people walking in circles through hallways that exist across different years. I hear my grandmother whisper sometimes, telling me I am not gone, only misplaced. I wonder if anyone in Allentown notices the house watching them, waiting for another name to add to its pages. I wonder if the family that moved into town still pretends everything is normal, still hides the sickness in their voices. I wonder if the broken billboard still follows that truck driver, telling him fears he never said aloud. I wonder if the people in my life still share my secrets behind locked doors, preparing for what they believe I will become. I wonder when someone else will unlock the basement, find the hidden room, and read my story written in a time that does not belong to either of us. The house will wait, patient and quiet. It always waits. The story teaches that some secrets should never be ignored because the past can trap those who refuse to understand it. Running from fear only gives it more power, while facing the truth is the only way to break its hold. We learn that silence can be dangerous when shared by an entire community hiding the same wounds. And in the end, the story warns that places remember people, especially those who pretend they are safe. I moved toward Erie because I thought I needed a place where I could breathe again, a place where my mind could slow down and my heart could stop racing from the noise of life. I believed an old house would calm me. I believed silence would help me rebuild myself. I was wrong. My name is Jonah Cross, and I never meant to walk into a past that refused to die. The house waited for me like it knew I was coming. It sat at the edge of a narrow road just outside Erie, with a cracked porch and windows that looked like tired eyes. The listing said it had been standing since long before the Civil War, and that alone pulled me toward it. I had always loved places older than my own memories. I trusted history more than people. History did not lie to my face. I worked as an archivist then, just simple work in a dusty office where people rarely talked to me except to hand me old papers. I lived a quiet life. Too quiet, maybe. But I never imagined how loud silence could become after midnight. When I first stepped inside the house, the smell of dust mixed with damp stone floated through the rooms. The floors were worn, the walls scratched, and the ceilings sagged a little like they had been holding their breath for years. But under all that age, I saw beauty. Old beams, carved trim, a fireplace with a mantel that someone had shaped with their own hands. The realtor told me everything needed work. Plumbing, roof, wiring, floors. I nodded and barely listened. I only saw what it could become. I only thought the house was waiting to be loved again. I bought it in one day. I could only fix the house on weekends. I drove from my apartment in Buffalo every Friday after work, reaching Erie late in the evening. At first, nothing strange happened. I cleaned. I painted. I dragged furniture across the floors. I slept on an air mattress in the living room. The nights were long but calm. Then came the fourth night. I woke at 2 a.m., sharp and cold, to footsteps above me. Not creaks, not settling. Actual footsteps, slow, heavy, crossing the upstairs hallway with purpose, moving from one side to the other. I froze. I held my breath. I listened. The steps stopped. Silence spread so wide it felt like the walls were waiting for me to respond. I told myself old houses move and shift. I told myself the sound was nothing, but my heart knew better. Something had walked above me. The next night, the footsteps returned, and they brought company. Metal clinked. Soft at first, like buckles brushing against each other, then a murmur. Low voices, too far away to understand, but close enough to feel. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step groaning under my weight. The noise came from the master bedroom, a room I had not touched yet, a room I avoided for no reason I could explain. I pushed the door open with one hand. The room was empty. Bare walls, cold air, dust on the floor, but something hung in the space, like breath from someone who had just left. I waited. The voices stopped. The metal stopped. The footsteps stopped. I backed away. After that, the house seemed to wake. Every night, the footsteps returned. They followed the same path. Hallway, master bedroom, silence. Then something new joined them. Marching, dozens of boots. Sharp, perfect rhythm. They marched as if an army had risen in my house. The sound would roll in from far away, growing louder until it filled every wall. Then it vanished. One night, the sky outside was clear and quiet, but inside the house a cannon fired. Not faint, not a trick of imagination. A booming blast so strong my windows rattled. My heart slammed against my ribs. Then another blast, and another. Between them, men shouted, orders, commands, pain. Gunfire cracked like bones. I looked outside. Nothing, only trees. Only darkness. I needed answers. I went to the Erie Library and spent hours digging through old records. I learned the land had been used during the Civil War. Not for a battle, but for what came after. A field hospital had once stood where my house stood now. Hundreds of wounded men were brought there from the fighting downstate. Many died before anyone could cut their uniforms open. Many others died after brutal surgeries done with no anesthesia, no clean tools. The records mentioned mass graves. Bodies later moved to a cemetery, though no one knew if every grave had been found. I stared at the papers until the words blurred. My house was built on suffering, on fear, on pain that never had time to leave. That night I lay on my air mattress and whispered to the dark that I knew now, that I understood, but understanding did not help. The footsteps grew louder, the voices closer. And then shadows joined them. I saw them first in the corner of my eye, dark shapes drifting through the hallway. Tall figures with gear slung across their shoulders, rifles in hand. Faces hidden. Every time I turned, they were gone. But the cold remained. I told myself to be brave. I was not brave the night one appeared at the foot of my bed. I woke at 3:05 a.m. to see a tall silhouette standing in front of me. No sound. No movement. Just a man-shaped shadow staring in silence. I could not breathe. I could not blink. The air felt thick, like water. Then the figure faded, dissolving like ash in wind. I did not sleep again. Then came July. A humid night, no breeze. I lay awake, sweating, waiting for the footsteps, waiting for the marching, waiting for the cannon. But something else came. Screaming, raw, violent, real pain. It rose from the master bedroom, cutting through the quiet like a blade. My skin turned to ice. I grabbed my phone for light and climbed the stairs. Every step shook under me, like the house itself feared what waited. The screaming grew louder. Voices surrounded it. Men murmuring frantically, metal clattering, and a wet sound like something being cut. I pushed the door open with shaking hands. The room changed. The bare floor became a wooden table stained dark. A young man lay on it, face twisted in agony, sweat dripping down his temples. His leg was mangled, blood pouring freely. 3 men in blood-covered aprons stood over him, one gripping a saw. Another pressed his hands on the man's shoulders, holding him down. No one looked at me. They were too busy fighting death. The scene flashed away, gone. Only my empty room remained, moonlight on the boards, dust in the corners. I fell backward, gasping, shaking so hard my teeth hit each other. I slept in my car until sunrise. The next day I called a local priest. He blessed the house room by room. He said pain can leave marks that never wash away. He said some spirits cannot find the road out. He said the blessing might calm them, but it would not erase what happened. For a few weeks, the house quieted. No footsteps, no marching, no cannon. I slept better. I almost convinced myself the horror was gone. But pain, once awakened, rarely sleeps again. The footsteps returned first. Gentle now, slow. Then the voices, whispering low. Then the shadows, watching me more boldly. I told myself I could still live here. I had come too far to leave. I tried speaking to them. I told them I respected them. I thanked them. I left flowers in the master bedroom where the table had appeared. I whispered that I was sorry for what they endured. Slowly, the sounds weakened. The shadows thinned. The air felt lighter. They were not gone, but they were quieter, as if they understood someone finally cared. But Erie has its own kind of darkness, and it slips into the cracks of your life without warning. The small town near my house had a strange habit. People measured life not by years, but by how long until they mentally gave up. They said it as if it were normal, as if counting the breaking point was easier than counting birthdays. It unsettled me. Worse was when the locals began to avoid me. Not slowly, not subtly, just gone. They stopped talking to me the moment I asked about old suicides in the area. Every family had at least one, sometimes two. I wanted to understand, but asking questions turned people cold. They stopped answering my greetings. They closed doors. They looked past me like I was fading away. I felt like the town itself wanted me silent. One evening I stopped at a small diner. The waitress stared at me like she knew my thoughts. When I ordered, she spoke my words with me, every syllable. She smiled without warmth, waiting for me to finish. It was like she already knew every choice I would make. I left without eating. Something was wrong in this place. Something lived under the soil, in the houses, in the minds of the people. Something old. Something hungry. The house felt it too. The footsteps grew strange. They paused at my door more often. The shadows began tilting their heads when they appeared, watching me with a kind of tired curiosity. The air carried a hum, low and constant, like whispers trapped under the floor. I tried to ignore it, but the house kept pulling me deeper. One night I woke at 1:29 a.m. to a figure sitting in the corner of my bedroom. A soldier, uniform torn, face empty. He whispered words I could not understand. His voice broke like paper. His eyes were hollow, as if he had seen too many endings. When I blinked, he was gone. The next night, another appeared. Closer, kneeling beside my bed. The next night, one stood in the doorway, not fading this time. Solid, as if the wall behind him held no meaning. I could not move. The room felt full of heat and cold at the same time. My breath turned white in the warm air. Then he spoke. Not a threat, not a warning. Just two quiet words that twisted my stomach. You stayed. I wanted to run, but my body refused. My mind shook. My heart clawed at my ribs. He stepped back and vanished. After that, the house whispered every night. Voices below the floor, voices inside the walls. And something colder grew in the master bedroom, like a hole where time slid in and out. I felt watched every second I spent there. The town grew stranger. People refused to make eye contact. They acted like they knew exactly what I would say before I said it. They waited for my words, expected them, needed them. And if I changed one phrase, they blinked in confusion, like I had broken a rule I never knew existed. I began to forget what normal life felt like. All that remained were whispers and shadows. All that remained was the house. On the anniversary of the old field hospital's darkest night, the house stirred again. Heat rose through the walls. Air tightened. Something walked the stairs. Not soldiers this time. Something heavier. Something that dragged memory behind it like a chain. I stood in the hallway, unable to step back. The master bedroom door creaked open by itself. Inside, the table stood again. The man on it. The surgeons. The saw. Their hands shaking. Their faces twisted with dread. Blood on the floor. Screaming, ripping the room apart. But this time, they saw me. All their heads turned. The man on the table reached toward me, fingers trembling, eyes begging for help I could not give. The surgeon shouted, not at him, at me, "Leave no more." The scene collapsed. The room fell silent. I ran downstairs, but the air thickened, pushing me back. Shadows crowded the walls. Footsteps circled me. Voices rose like a storm. The words wrapped around me, heavy and cold. "Give up." Like the town said, "Give up." Like the house wanted. I fell to my knees. My breath cracked. My chest ached. I felt myself slipping, like the house was pulling my mind into the same broken space where those soldiers still wandered. But I forced myself to whisper, "I'm here. I'm listening. I won't forget you." Everything stopped. Silence. The shadows loosened. The air softened. The house eased, just slightly, like I had passed something it demanded. I still live here. The footsteps still return. The shadows still drift. The soldiers still walk through the hall some nights. And sometimes, just before dawn, I hear the faint echo of cannon fire rolling through the walls like a memory trying to breathe again. I do not fear them now, but I do fear the town, because every time I ask the wrong question, another person disappears from my life, as if I was never part of theirs. Every time I speak a word someone already predicted, I feel something in me weaken, like the house is teaching me how to give up too. And sometimes, late at night, the soldier from my bedroom returns. He stands at the foot of my bed, quiet, waiting. He never speaks again. He only watches, as if he's counting the days until I finally join him. The story reminds us that the past never truly disappears. It waits in silence for someone willing to face it. When we avoid truth or ignore suffering, darkness grows in the spaces where honesty should live. Fear becomes strongest when we pretend nothing is wrong, and sometimes the only way to escape the ghosts around us is to stop running from the ones inside us. I could feel the cold air biting my skin long before I understood why I kept returning to abandoned places. I always said it was curiosity, but the truth was that empty buildings made me feel less alone. My name is Ryvan, and I grew up in a quiet corner of Scranton, Pennsylvania, where old factories, silent mills, and forgotten homes filled the landscape like bones from another time. My childhood was strange, shaped by stories of people who vanished without warning and a town that pretended nothing was wrong. Sometimes I wondered if the missing people had simply stepped into someone else's life, the way I often felt like I had stepped into mine, wearing memories that never belonged to me. When I became an adult, I joined a small group of urban explorers. Most weekends we wandered through abandoned schools, rusted plants, and decaying houses. We took pictures. We researched. We tried to understand what time had erased. Scranton was full of stories, worn down by years of smoke and steel. Most places were sad, broken, but not dangerous. That changed the day we decided to explore the old West Hollow Psychiatric Center on the far edge of town. The hospital had closed after years of scandals, lost funding, and whispered rumors of cruel practices. The property stretched across a lonely hill, a narrow road curling toward it like a warning finger. Locals told us to stay away. Police guarded the grounds when they felt like it, and no one who trespassed came back with the same look in their eyes. Some people said the silence there was not normal silence, that it breathed like it was alive. On a cloud-heavy afternoon in October, my friends and I decided to enter anyway. There were 4 of us, me, Lauren, Mako, and Finn. We parked our car far from the property, near an old mill that had once controlled the rhythm of the entire town. The mill whistle used to blow every morning and evening, shaping the emotions of the people who worked there. Even though the mill had shut down years ago, some nights residents claimed they still heard the whistle echoing through the valley, telling them when to wake, when to sleep, when to feel fear. We moved through the trees and slipped through a gap in a rusted fence. The hospital towered ahead, a long shape of brick and broken windows. Ivy covered most of the walls, twisting into empty rooms like searching fingers. The main entrance was blocked, but a side door hung loose and splintered, as if someone had forced it open recently. I stepped inside first, lifting my flashlight. Dust floated in the beam like pale ghosts rising from the floor. The inside smelled of mold and old medicine. Papers lay scattered across the tiles. Graffiti covered the walls, colors smeared into strange shapes. Furniture was overturned and broken. The air felt heavy, as if the building held its breath while watching us. We explored the first floor slowly. Offices, waiting rooms, counseling spaces. All empty, nothing but dust and memories. I tried to imagine the people who once sat here, hoping for help or fearing what waited in the locked rooms below. I wondered if they had felt the same quiet pressure I felt now, the sense that someone unseen walked beside us. After a while, we found a stairwell leading to the basement. The steps were narrow and damp. Water dripped somewhere, steady and slow. Each step echoed too loudly, bouncing back as if the darkness wanted to swallow the sound. At the bottom was a long hallway lined with heavy metal doors. They looked more like prison cells than patient rooms. Each door had a small window covered with wire mesh. Padlocks hung from some latches, rusted but still attached. The smell down here was sharper, a mix of wet concrete and something sour beneath it. We opened the doors one by one. Most cells were bare, nothing but concrete walls and floors, but a few still held metal restraints bolted to the walls. In one cell, leather straps dangled like lifeless limbs. Another room held a narrow bed frame with more straps attached. I felt my stomach tighten. I had read about old treatments, the cold kind that called suffering a cure, but seeing the real thing made my hands tremble. At the end of the hallway stood a door different from the others, newer metal. Heavy lock still in place. Mako pulled a small crowbar from his backpack. He jammed it under the latch and leaned with all his weight until the lock snapped. The door swung open, complaining in a long groan. The room inside made us freeze. It was larger than the others. An examination table stood in the center with rusted stirrups. A metal cart nearby held tools that looked surgical, some sharp, some hooked. Old patient files were scattered across the floor, pages faded and curled with moisture. I picked one up and read the first line. It belonged to a woman admitted decades ago for severe depression. The treatments listed included electricity, drug trials, and something called focused correction. The notes described the procedures in such cold words that each sentence felt like a knife. The last line said she died from complications. I opened another file, another story. More harm, more pain. None of the procedures were approved. None were ethical. None were human. The files stretched across the room like an ocean of forgotten suffering. And the dates did not stop decades ago. They went all the way up to 1 year before the hospital closed. Laren whispered that we should leave, but before any of us moved, Mako called from the corner. He had found a hidden door behind a stack of old mattresses. It led to another passage. We hesitated, arguing in low voices. Fear pressed on our chests, but curiosity was stronger. And there was something else too, a sense of responsibility, as if we owed something to the people who had been hurt here. We stepped into the hidden corridor. It was narrower, the walls closer together. More doors lined the passage, smaller and tighter. We opened the first one and found a room barely big enough for a person to stand in. No window, no chair. The walls were covered in scratches, long and frantic. Dried stains marked the corners. I felt cold crawl up my spine. It was a sensory deprivation cell meant to crush the mind. We checked the next rooms, padded walls torn open, broken chains hanging from the ceiling, strange markings etched into the concrete. Some doors refused to open, almost as if something pressed back from inside. At the end of the corridor was a room that felt different the moment we stepped inside. It looked like an operating room. A long table stood in the center with restraints at every joint. Shelves along the wall held bottles and jars with cloudy liquids. Some jars held shapes floating inside, impossible to identify clearly. A wide mirror hung on one wall. I realized it was a one-way mirror, meant for watching without being seen. We found a small door behind a cabinet that led to the observation room. A desk, a chair, a filing cabinet. Dozens of notebooks covered the desk, each one filled with writing in the same clinical, emotionless handwriting we had seen in the files. The notes described the procedures in disturbing detail, documenting reactions, pain levels, failures, and final outcomes. Many entries ended with the same words: subject expired. The notebooks went back decades. The experiments had lasted longer than anyone had known, but the worst part came at the end of the most recent notebook. The last entry was dated only months ago. It said the center was inactive but maintained, and that supplies were secured for future use. My heart thudded hard. Someone had been here recently. Someone had kept everything ready. We hurried out, taking as many pictures as we could on the way. Every hallway felt darker now. Every shadow seemed to shift. When we reached the main floor, I heard something that made my blood turn to ice. A door closing somewhere deep inside the building. Then footsteps, slow, steady, coming closer. We ran. We pushed through the broken side door and sprinted across the dead grass toward the fence. Halfway there, I glanced back and saw a figure standing at a window on the top floor. I could not see a face, only a dark shape watching us leave. We did not stop running until we reached the car. None of us spoke for a long time. The silence felt wrong, like something followed us out. Back in town, I went straight to the police. I turned in the photos. I told them everything. They took my report seriously. Within days, state police and forensic teams filled the hospital grounds. They discovered more than we had seen: patient files, secret rooms, evidence of experiments, bodies buried on the property, people who were listed as transferred but never made it anywhere, and they confirmed that someone had been inside recently. Equipment cleaned, files arranged, rooms prepared, but no one was arrested. Most of the doctors responsible were long dead or unidentifiable, and whoever had been there months ago had left nothing behind. The hospital was sealed, windows bricked, doors welded shut, a new fence wrapped around the property. But the truth stayed loose, like something still wandering the halls. I still think about the figure in the window. I wonder if it was one of the old doctors, or a student of their work, or someone who had stepped into another person's life without resistance, the way some people vanish and others appear wearing their memories. I also think about how the town used to discourage friendships, how people said it made the population easier to control. I think about how loneliness was not natural here. It was planned, managed, enforced. Sometimes at night I hear the old factory whistle. The mill has been shut for years, but the sound floats across town like a command. Wake, sleep, fear, remember. Some nights I feel like the whistle is trying to call me back to the hospital, like the building remembers my footsteps and wants them again. And some nights, I feel like I am not living my own life at all, like I walked into someone else's story long ago. Someone who did not resist when I took their place. I try not to think about what the notebook said. Future use, materials ready, observers waiting. But sometimes, when the wind shifts, I hear footsteps behind me, slow and steady, like someone patient enough to follow me forever. In places where suffering was once ignored, silence becomes dangerous. When people turn away from cruelty, it grows in the shadows until it becomes part of everyday life. Evil survives not because it is strong, but because no one questions it. The story reminds us that we must never stay quiet about wrongdoing, never pretend something isn't happening just because it is easier to look away. The moment a community accepts silence, it becomes a prison, and anyone can lose themselves inside it. The lesson is simple but frightening. If you ignore the truth long enough, it will come looking for you. I began to notice the strange things in Bethlehem on the very first night, but I kept pretending nothing was wrong. That was my mistake. My name is Mara Collins, and before everything happened, I was just a tired graduate student trying to finish a thesis about old American farms. I never imagined the research would push me into a nightmare that still wakes me up in the middle of the night. I grew up in a noisy city, always wanting quiet places, always believing silence meant safety. Back then, I trusted houses, trusted small towns, trusted people who smiled too easily. I did not understand how danger could hide inside warmth, how horror could curl itself into something gentle. I learned that lesson in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. My mother's old friend, Miss Halperin, asked me to house-sit her farmhouse for 2 weeks while she visited her brother in Virginia. She said the land would feel peaceful, perfect for writing, perfect for thinking. The job was simple. Just feed her 2 cats and water her plants. I agreed without thinking twice. I wanted quiet. I wanted focus. I wanted to feel useful. Now I wish I had stayed home. The farmhouse stood at the edge of the woods with pale walls, a deep porch, and windows that watched the road like half-open eyes. Bethlehem may be a small city, but this house felt like it belonged to a forgotten world. A gravel driveway curled through tall trees. The closest neighbor lived far across a slope of sagging fields. At night, you could not hear a single car. You could not hear anything except wind brushing dead leaves and the hum of crickets shaking the dark. When I first arrived, the house felt old but calm. The cats only looked at me with lazy suspicion. Ms. Halperin showed me everything. The lights, the keys, the basement door she always kept closed because the hinges stuck, and the attic she rarely used. She told me her house had a soul, that old homes always did, that you just had to learn its rhythms. I laughed politely. She hugged me goodbye and wished me quiet nights. Quiet was the last thing I got. The first 3 days slipped by without trouble. I woke early, made coffee, and wrote at the kitchen table. Sometimes I walked into town and watched the people move about with soft politeness, every face warm but slightly rehearsed. I felt that even the grocery store cashier smiled as if she were following lines from a script, careful not to make mistakes. Nobody talked too loudly. Nobody seemed annoyed. Nobody asked questions they did not need to ask. It surprised me, but I pushed the thought away. Small towns were like that, I told myself. But small towns do not hide everything they pretend. On the 4th night, I noticed the first wrong detail. The dining room chair had moved. I had not touched it since breakfast, yet it sat pulled out, as if someone had pushed back from the table moments earlier. I stared at it for a long time, feeling slow fear crawl up my arms. I finally pushed it back in, telling myself I must have moved it without noticing. But I knew I hadn't. The next morning, I found the bathroom door closed. I always left it open so the cats could wander around. The door was heavy and never moved on its own. I stood there, hand on the doorknob, trying to swallow the cold feeling in my throat. I opened it slowly. Nothing seemed disturbed, nothing out of place, but the air felt wrong, as if someone had just been there. By the 6th day, the unnerving details began stacking like stones on my chest. A mug I had placed in the dishwasher sat clean and dry on the counter. A book from the living room shelf rested in a different spot. A hallway light flickered on even though I had switched it off. All of it tiny, all of it easy to dismiss, yet each change felt deliberate. Not accidents, not the cats, not me. Someone was in the house. But I kept lying to myself. I told myself isolation was playing tricks on my mind, that my stress was twisting shapes into threats. My mother always said imagination becomes sharp in silence. I laughed at the thought, but the laugh felt thin. Then came the 7th night. I woke around 2:17 a.m. to the sound of slow, heavy footsteps in the hallway. Not quick steps, not stumbling, steady, careful, as if the person walking did not want to wake me. The floorboards groaned under the weight. I froze in bed, my heart hammering so loudly I worried the sound might give me away. The air felt thick, as though the house itself held its breath. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. Then silence. I slid out of bed, grabbed my phone, and opened the door with shaking fingers. My flashlight beam stretched down the empty hallway. Nothing. The cats lay curled on the downstairs couch, eyes half open and lazy. Nobody else was there. But someone had walked outside my room. I knew that as clearly as I know my own name. The next morning delivered the proof I needed yet feared. Muddy footprints trailed from the back door to the basement door. They were small, smaller than mine. The back door was still locked. No broken glass, no forced entry. A person had entered without unlocking anything. My breath shook as I followed the prints to the top of the basement stairs. I hesitated, remembering that the basement smelled of old dirt and mold. The single bulb barely penetrated the dark. The walls yawned with shadows. I had only gone down once on the first day and avoided it ever since. But the footprints waited. I descended slowly, gripping the railing for courage. At the bottom, the prints led toward a darker part of the basement, where the foundation dipped into a narrow crawl space. My phone light cut through the gloom, trembling in my hand. The crawl space gaped like a mouth. Inside, the dirt floor showed flattened patches, worn from use. An old blanket lay crumpled there. A stained backpack slouched beside it. Empty food wrappers glinted in the dust. Someone had been living beneath the house. Someone had been crawling out at night, watching me, studying me. I staggered backward, breath sharp, vision flickering with panic. As I climbed the stairs, a faint sound drifted up from the crawl space, fabric shifting against dirt, a slow scrape. Someone was waking up down there. I ran. I did not grab anything except my keys and phone. I did not lock the door. I drove until Bethlehem faded behind me and bright lights from a gas station spilled across my shaking hands. There, I called the police. My voice trembled, but I explained everything. 2 officers met me and followed me back to the house. They walked through each room with weapons drawn. I waited outside, pulse wild in my ears. When they finally returned, their faces were grave. Yes, someone had been living down there. They found food, water, clothes, a notebook filled with neat handwriting. The entries detailed my daily schedule, my meals, my habits. They showed the times I left for walks, the minutes I spent making coffee, the hours I slept. I felt sick, violated, stripped of safety. The stranger had been watching me not from a window, not from a distance, but from beneath my feet, studying me like an experiment. The police searched the property but found no one. The exterior access panel behind thick bushes showed signs of constant use, but the person had vanished. No fingerprints, no clues, no name. Just like Bethlehem itself, the stranger followed quiet rules. They moved with intention. They lived without leaving a trace. They escaped without being seen. I called Miss Halperin and told her everything. She returned home early and insisted I leave immediately. I packed in minutes. Even as I left, I felt eyes on me, watching from the tree line or perhaps from the dark beneath the porch. I kept glancing back, expecting someone to crawl out from under the house. In the weeks that followed, I could not sleep. I checked closets. I checked under the bed. I checked the spaces between floorboards. Every sound became a threat. Every creak of wood felt like a warning. I went to therapy, but fear clung to me like smoke. My mind replayed the soft footsteps outside my door, the marks in the basement dirt, the careful handwriting describing my morning coffee. The thought haunted me most of all, the question of why I had been chosen. But it was not just the farmhouse. It was Bethlehem. During my research, I visited schools, markets, and street fairs, and I noticed unsettling patterns. Children spoke differently at home than at school, like actors switching roles. Parents coached them with quiet panic, reminding them of lines they must never forget. Grief felt hidden too, locked behind stiff smiles. When a neighbor lost her husband, People comforted her with bright faces, insisting everything was fine, insisting nothing bad ever happened in Bethlehem. When she cried, they turned away sharply, as if sadness broke a silent rule. Kindness existed, but it obeyed conditions, strict unwritten laws. Break them, and help disappeared instantly. I saw that once at the farmer's market, when a woman shouted at a vendor about spoiled fruit. The crowd around her froze, their smiles dropping like dead leaves. They slowly stepped away as if she had become invisible. No one answered her. No one met her eyes. She apologized again and again, voice trembling, but nobody returned her space. The town felt practiced, polished, rehearsed. Every person a careful performer, every interaction a scene. Slip out of character, and the world watched you like prey. It made sense later. The stranger who lived beneath the farmhouse had not been an outsider. They had been following the same strange, perfect rules. That realization came months later when police contacted me again. They had not found the person, but they discovered something else. Hidden behind loose boards in the crawl space, they found a second notebook, older, filled with observations about families in Bethlehem. Descriptions of parents correcting their speech, reminders about how to behave in public, notes about which neighbors broke rules and what happened after. I read one page, and it chilled me forever. Those who step outside the script must be watched until they return to their lines. The handwriting was the same as the notes about my routines. Someone in Bethlehem watched rule breakers. Someone studied them. Someone punished them. I had broken the script by being new, being different, being unaware of expectations. That person had marked me as a subject, had lived beneath me, had crawled through my nights, had memorized me. But the worst line in the notebook was near the end. She will not understand the town until she loses something important. And below it, a new line had been added days before I fled. Tomorrow night, I introduced myself. The police never found the stranger. Bethlehem never spoke about it publicly. The people there kept smiling, kept pretending everything was fine. The quiet rules stayed in place. The script stayed memorized. Life went on. I left the farmhouse behind, but the fear followed me home. I still check under my bed. I still stare at the cracks between floorboards. I still wake at 2:17 a.m. at the smallest sound, imagining slow footsteps outside my door. I fear crawl spaces. I fear basements. I fear silence. But most of all, I fear Bethlehem. Because I know the stranger is still out there, watching someone, studying them, waiting for them to break the script. And I know that someday when I am tired or alone or careless, when I let my guard down even for a moment, they might return, not to study me this time, to finish what they started. In life, danger does not always arrive with noise, warnings, or broken doors. Sometimes it moves quietly, learns your habits, and waits for the moment when you stop paying attention. Never assume safety just because everything looks peaceful on the surface. Stay aware, stay alert, and trust the feeling that tells you something is wrong, because the danger you ignore is often the danger that grows closest to you. I never planned to tell this, yet I feel something pushing me to speak, as if the story wants a voice of its own. I grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, a quiet place with rolling fields, covered bridges, and a strange silence that settles over the land when autumn comes. People call it peaceful, but I learned that peace can hide things too dark to name. My name is Benjamin, and I studied forgotten folklore at a small college just outside Lancaster. I always loved the old stories, the ones people whispered but never wrote down. I never cared for fame or research awards. I only cared about the truth buried under layers of fear and memory. My grandmother used to say that some truths wait for the right person to uncover them. I wish I had never become that person. I wish I had never followed the path that changed my life forever. Back then, I wanted to write a thesis about strange tales from small towns in Pennsylvania. I liked the idea of exploring history that lived in old people's memories, not in books. I liked tracing patterns no one else noticed. I liked walking into dusty rooms, reading forgotten news clippings, and feeling like the past was still breathing. But I had no idea that something in Lancaster breathed back. My research started simple. I went through old papers, old map records, and missing persons files from the public library. I did not expect to find anything special. Yet one night, around 2:17 a.m., I saw a pattern so sharp it felt like a knife pressed against my mind. It was a list of disappearances. Not many, but enough to alarm me. People lost in the woods near a place called Ember Ridge Trail, a long looping path that cut through trees so old they seemed to lean over the land like watching giants. Locals loved hiking there, especially during fall. The colors were bright, the air was crisp, and the trail was known for its high rocky view of the farmland below. But something was wrong with that place. The first disappearance happened in 1934. A man vanished on a breezy October day. His car sat alone at the trailhead. His jacket was inside. His footprints went forward but never came back. Search teams hunted the woods for weeks. They found nothing, not even broken branches. The case faded away, and people treated it like an odd accident. The second case happened years later. A woman hiking with her brother stepped aside to take a picture. He turned around, and she was gone. Her camera lay on the path, still warm from her hands. Her picture showed the trees and the slope behind her, but nothing strange. She vanished anyway. More disappearances followed. A teenager, a hunter, a mother of two, a married couple, an experienced trail runner. All gone from Ember Ridge, all in October. All near a place called Lantern Point, a cliff shaped like a bent lantern hook. I counted 13 official cases across 80 years, though rumors suggested more. Towns like Lancaster carry memories the way old trees carry rings, tight and deep beneath the surface. You cannot see them unless you cut through. The deeper I dug, the darker the rings became. I decided to interview elders in the area. They were the treasure keepers of stories that never reached paper. Most shrugged, saying the woods had always been dangerous. Yet one elderly woman, living near the outskirts of town, shared something that pulled the ground out from under me. She told me Ember Ridge was never meant to be touched. Long before Lancaster existed, tribes avoided that land, calling it the crossing place. They believed a boundary there thinned every October. They believed the dead whispered through the trees, calling out to the living. She said the land had once been a sacred burial site. Then settlers cut through it, built trails, and ignored the warnings. She told me something else too. She said every town learns to accept slow harm. People notice a danger but grow used to it. They forget because forgetting feels safer. A man sees how easily people accept injustice when it grows inside familiar soil. That line stuck with me like a splinter. I decided to visit the trail myself on October 14th, the date most disappearances occurred. I should have stayed home. I should have listened to the trembling in my bones. But curiosity is a trap we build with our own hands. Morning came with low fog curling through the trees like ghostly breath. I parked at the trailhead. My backpack held a map, compass, camera, snacks, and a small recorder. I left a message with a friend telling him exactly where I would be. I thought that would keep me safe. The trail felt wrong the moment I stepped onto it. The air was too still. The colors duller than usual. Even the birds seemed muted, as if holding their breath. I walked slowly, taking notes, following the curve of the path through thick woods. The deeper I went, the stranger the atmosphere became. It felt like the earth itself was watching me. Halfway up the ridge, I saw carvings etched into an old tree. Circles, lines, shapes I did not recognize. Fresh cuts, though the tree was older than any house in Lancaster. My heart began to pound. I moved quickly to the overlook Lantern Point. That place felt wrong in a way that made my stomach twist. The mist thickened around the rocks. The wind dropped away. Sound disappeared. The world narrowed to the cold stone beneath my feet. I raised my camera and took a few shots. Trees, fog, fog. The view, nothing odd. Then I heard it. A voice. Soft, distant, calling in a tone I could not understand. My mind tried to explain it away, but my body froze. The voice came again, clearer, drifting through the trees like a breath pushed through leaves. Something inside me wanted to follow it. My feet slid forward without thought. My mind screamed stop, but my body reached toward the trees as if pulled by invisible hands. The world felt tilted, like I stood on the edge of two places at once. Then a cold wave of fear snapped me awake. I stepped back. My breath shook in my chest. I turned and walked fast down the trail, refusing to run. The voice kept calling. Faint, soft, soft, beckoning. The farther I moved, the weaker it became. By the time I reached my car, the voice had faded into the morning air. Back home, I thought I would calm down. Instead, things got worse. When I checked my photos, one image from Lantern Point made my heart stop. Behind the trees stood a tall figure, dark and thin, almost empty in shape. It had no face, no features, just a hollow outline. But it leaned toward me, as if listening. I showed the picture to a few professors. They said it was nothing, a shadow, a trick of mist, yet I knew I had been alone. And the figure stood in a spot too dense for anyone to walk through. Word spread slowly around town. Some officials posted warning signs. People ignored them. They believed leaving the trail alone would destroy the local hiking culture. A strange idea, yet the whole town behaved as if losing the trail would break their lives, even though no proof of this existed. 2 months later, another person vanished. Same trail. Same date, same silence. Same empty search. I felt guilt crawl into my bones. I had tried to expose the truth, but the truth swallowed another soul anyway. I stopped hiking. I stopped sleeping well. I avoided the woods. Yet the story followed me like a shadow I could not escape. I tried to move on, but my memories began to shift. I mentioned one disappearance to a friend, but he insisted the person had never existed. I checked the records again. The file was gone. A whole person erased. A whole case erased. It felt like the land had reached into the past and rewoven it. A woman once told me that memories can be rewritten by places that do not want to be known. She said that when the boundary thins, the world reshapes itself to hide the truth. I did not believe her then. I do now. I kept digging because fear mixed with obsession until they became the same thing. Every detail I found felt like it was slipping through my fingers, fading behind the fog that wrapped Ember Ridge. Each week, more locals insisted they had never heard of disappearances. Even people who once told me stories now denied them. It felt like the land was swallowing the past. My own mind changed too. I found notes in my handwriting that I did not remember writing. I found maps marked with circles I did not draw. I found recordings with my voice whispering things I did not recall saying. I realized that the trail wanted more than hikers. It wanted witnesses, people who tried to expose it, people who thought they understood it. I realized it was not just a place. It was a presence, something old, something patient, something that knew how to hide by changing what people remembered. One night, around 7:45 p.m., I heard that same voice again, not outside, not in the woods, in my home, soft, calling from the hallway. I forced myself not to look. I shut my door and stayed awake until sunrise. My life became a cage of fear. Every October, the air around Lancaster changes. The wind goes quiet, the trees tilt slightly. The nights pull shadows longer than they should be, and I feel something waiting near the ridge. A part of me knows the story is unfinished. The land does not forget. It learns, it changes, it adapts. It hides its hunger by shaping memories around itself. I also know that silence is what keeps horrors alive. So I tell this now, hoping someone listens before the land changes too much for anyone to remember the truth. If you ever visit Lancaster and think about walking Ember Ridge Trail, remember this: not every path leads forward. Some lead into places that are not meant for the living. Some call your name with voices you cannot resist. And some wait for the moment you step too far from the world you know. Sometimes the real danger is not the monster hiding in the woods, but the silence we accept in our own lives. When people see harm happening slowly, they begin to ignore it, pretending it is normal. They convince themselves that nothing bad will happen to them, that the problem belongs to someone else. But evil grows strongest where people refuse to speak, refuse to question, and refuse to remember the truth. The lesson is clear. Never trust a place that asks you to forget. Never follow a voice that feels too familiar, and never walk into darkness just because everyone else does. Some paths are meant to be left alone, and some warnings should never be ignored. The world does not always protect those who deny the danger. It hunts them instead. It spaces. I never meant to return to Harrisburg. I left when I was 18 and promised myself I would never go back, but life has a way of dragging you toward the places you fear most. My name is Mateo, and this is the last story I ever wanted to tell. I was driving into the city on a cold afternoon, the sky bruised and heavy with rain. My uncle had died 2 weeks earlier, and his lawyer insisted that I come collect a few personal items left for me. I did not want them. I barely knew him, but something in the lawyer's voice made me think it would be worse to refuse. So I went. Harrisburg looked smaller than I remembered, but it felt heavier, as if the air carried secrets I had once been too young to understand. I passed the river, the cracked sidewalks, the stores that always seemed one customer away from closing. People walked with the same expression, a quiet smile, but their eyes looked tired, as if joy was something they practiced rather than felt. I reached my uncle's old house near the edge of town. The windows were dark. The grass was tall. It felt abandoned even though the lawyer had told me the neighbors watched it for years. When I stepped onto the porch, the door creaked open on its own. I told myself it was the wind. I stepped inside. The house smelled of dust, old books, and something faintly metallic. My uncle had lived alone. That much I knew. People in town used to whisper about him, about his strange habits, about how he stayed indoors during certain nights, about how visitors never stayed long. My mother never explained why she stopped talking to him. She only told me he had burdens that were not ours. The lawyer met me in the living room. He was thin and pale with sharp eyes that seemed to study every breath I took. He handed me a small box. Wooden. Locked. Locked. No key. He said my uncle wanted me to open it only when I felt ready. I did not understand. I asked what was inside. The lawyer looked toward the hallway as if someone might be listening. He said the box held my family's history, the real history, not the stories told to children. Then he left. I stood alone in the house. The wind pushed against the walls. A faint tapping came from upstairs. I tried to ignore it, but the sound grew steady, like someone knocking from the inside of a wall. I almost called out, but something told me not to. Instead, I grabbed the box and walked outside. On my way to the car, an elderly man stepped out from behind a tree. His clothes were dirty. His beard was long, but his eyes were sharp, the way a cornered animal watches the world. He whispered my name before I could ask who he was. He said I looked like my uncle. He said my return had awakened things that should have stayed quiet. Then he asked if I knew the truth about my family. I shook my head. He smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes. He said truth sticks to blood, and blood remembers everything. I drove to my motel, trying to silence the dread crawling through me. The rooms were old but cheap. The hallway lights flickered as if the wiring had been untouched since the 70s. I locked the door and set the wooden box on the table. I did not want to open it, but I also could not stop looking at it. That night, I could not sleep. The air felt thick. The shadows in the corners stretched too far, as if reaching toward me. Around 2:40 a.m., a soft scraping sound came from inside the box. I froze. The box was closed, locked, and yet something inside it moved. I backed away. My heart pounded. Then the sound stopped. Silence settled in, heavy and watchful. I stayed awake until dawn. The next morning, I went into town to clear my head. People stared at me as I passed, not unkindly, but with a strange recognition, as if they knew something about me that I did not know. At the diner, the waitress addressed me by my uncle's name. When I corrected her, she apologized, but her face went pale. She told me ambition was dangerous here. People who reached for more than the town allowed often returned broken. It was better to stay quiet, she said. Better to follow the traditions. Better to leave old stories buried. I knew she was warning me. I also knew I would not listen. I went to the county archives. The building was cold and silent except for the humming of old lights. I looked for anything involving my family. I found records of strange illnesses, sudden deaths, accidents that did not look like accidents. Every generation of my family lost someone young, someone who had started asking questions, someone who tried to leave. There was more. A minister's journal from 80 years ago mentioned a curse tied to my great-grandfather, a burden passed from one relative to another. A burden that could be transferred only when the receiver asked the wrong questions. My chest tightened. The box, the whispers, the warnings. I left the archives shaking. When I returned to the motel, the door was open. My luggage was untouched. But the box was gone. My heart dropped. I rushed outside and saw a figure at the edge of the parking lot. The same elderly man from the house. He held the box in his hands. He motioned for me to follow. I should have run, but fear and curiosity tangled inside me. I followed him to an abandoned church at the edge of the woods. The building leaned as if trying to escape the earth pulling it down. The man walked inside. I followed. Candles burned along the pews. Shadows danced along the walls. The man placed the box on the altar and said I needed to open it. He said it belonged to me now. My uncle had carried it for years, and before him, my grandfather, and before him, generations more. I asked why it had to be me. His answer was simple: because I had returned, because I had asked, because the burden had been waiting. He stepped back. He told me once, the box opened. There would be no way to undo it. Unless I passed it on, unless someone else asked, unless someone else showed curiosity. My hand shook as I touched the lid. The lock snapped open on its own. Inside the box was a bundle of letters, brittle and stained with age. I lifted the first one. It was from my great-grandmother. The words trembled on the page. She wrote of a shadow that followed her family for decades. A presence that demanded attention, a punishment tied to questions. Every time someone sought the truth, the shadow came closer and misfortune followed. My uncle's latest letter was on top. He wrote that he felt the presence watching him every night, waiting for the next heir to come forward. He wrote that he hoped I would never return. But blood has gravity, and gravity always wins. A sudden cold wrapped around me. The candles flickered. The elderly man whispered for me to run. His voice trembled. He said the presence had come to claim its next carrier. The shadow stretched along the walls, twisting, bending, curling toward me. A low hum filled the air. The letters shook in my hands. I staggered back, but the shadows followed. The man shouted for me to leave, but the door slammed shut. I felt the darkness slide toward me like a giant hand. It wrapped around my thoughts, squeezing until everything inside me shook. I could not move. I could barely breathe. The church groaned as if it were alive. Then the darkness spoke, not in words, in memories. It showed me generations of my family, each one chaste, each one broken, each one burdened by the same weight I now felt crushing my chest. They had all tried to escape. They had all failed. The darkness pressed closer. It offered me a choice: carry the burden or pass it on. But it warned that passing it would demand a price. Someone innocent, someone curious, someone who trusted me. I ran. The doors burst open. I fled into the cold night. I did not look back. I reached my car and drove away from the church, the town, the shadows. But the presence followed. Over the next weeks, strange things began happening. Lights flickered, doors opened. Whispers crawled along the walls of my apartment. I saw figures in mirrors that were not me. I felt breath on my neck while I slept. I tried to pretend it wasn't real. But denial only made the presence angry. One night, around 3:19 a.m., I woke to find a woman standing at the foot of my bed. Her cheeks hollow, her eyes black. She whispered in a voice that cracked like dry wood. She asked if I wanted to be free. She asked if I was ready to pass the burden. I screamed. She vanished, but the question remained. My life unraveled. I lost my job after a series of mistakes I did not remember making. My car crashed after the steering wheel jerked on its own. My health weakened fast. Doctors found nothing. They looked at me like I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. I returned to Harrisburg, desperate for help. I found the elderly man again. He looked older, more broken. He said the presence was stronger now. It fed on fear, on confusion, on bloodlines. He told me my uncle tried to resist until the end. But the burden does not tolerate resistance. I asked how he survived it. His expression hollowed. He said he had not survived. Not really. He had merely delayed the inevitable by passing it on to my uncle. He told me the truth. Someone always pays, and the burden always finds a home. He warned me that soon the presence would demand I choose. Either I let it consume me slowly, or I give it a new host. Someone who trusted me, someone who asked the wrong question. I told him I would never hurt another person. He nodded sadly. He said, everyone said that in the beginning. The presence grew stronger. Shadows moved even in daylight. People on the street stared at me as if they sensed something following close behind me. Something hungry. I returned to my uncle's house one last time. I wanted answers, but the house felt colder than before. I entered the room where he died. The air thickened. The walls whispered. My name echoed softly like breath against a window. Then I saw him, my uncle. Thin, pale, watching me from the corner, his eyes empty, his voice quiet. He begged me to run. He said the burden was almost fully mine. He said my time was short. I stepped back. My pulse thundered. The shadows behind him swarmed, twisting into a shape that was almost human. The presence leaned forward, as if studying me. It whispered the same question: carry the burden, or pass it on. I fled again. But fleeing did not matter anymore. The presence followed. Over the next days, the world felt unreal. People moved in slow motion. My thoughts tangled. My reflections shifted. I heard footsteps behind me even when the street was empty. I felt watched everywhere I went. The presence grew impatient. Last night, around 1:12 a.m., I woke to find the wooden box on my bedside table. The letters lay open, the ink dripping as if freshly written. The presence stood near my bed, its form flickering like smoke. It whispered that time was gone. Tonight, the air is heavy. The lights flicker. The walls breathe. I write this because I know what comes next. The burden demands a choice. A final one. If I stay silent, it will consume me. Slowly, painfully, completely. If I speak the words, if I pass the story on to someone who asks, I walk free. I do not want to hurt anyone. I do not want to continue the cycle. But I feel the words rising in my throat. The temptation is sharp. Relief waits only one sentence away, yet I hold on. For now, I hope this confession keeps the presence quiet for a moment. I hope the night passes. I hope morning comes. I do not know if it will. If you hear tapping behind you, do not turn. If you feel breath on your ear, do not listen. If the shadows near you begin to stretch, walk away. Do not ask questions. Curiosity is the doorway. And once opened, it never closes again. Trying to run from generational pain only gives it more power. If you don't face the truth, the past finds a way to return. Silence can become a curse of its own. I kept hearing people say that York had a quiet soul, but I learned the hard way that some souls whisper only when they want you to hear them. I learned that on my first night alone in the old Keystone textile plant. My name is Marcus Hale, and before that night shift, I had never believed that a place could study you the same way a person does. I had never believed that a place could wait for you. But when my life fell apart, when my debts grew faster than my hope, I took the only job I could find, a job that felt offered not out of need, but out of expectation. Like someone had predicted the exact moment my defenses would break. Poverty had been calling itself humility for months, and I had been too tired to argue back. The job was simple on paper. I was hired as an overnight inspection custodian for the abandoned Keystone plant, a giant of rusted brick on the edge of York where the Susquehanna River bends like an old spine. My task was to walk the corridors every 2 hours, check for trespassers, and make reports for the redevelopment company that claimed it wanted to tear the place down one day. The hiring manager barely looked at me. He only asked if I frighten easy. I told him no, but the truth was, I had been afraid of life for a long time. The plant had shut down 23 years earlier after a furnace collapse that killed 7 workers. People in York still told the story in low tones, their voices carrying a strange pride. A town mistaking depression for loyalty, holding its tragedies like medals because letting go felt like betrayal. I used to think they spoke about the plant with sadness. Later, I wondered if it was warning. I began my shift at 7:45 p.m. The sun was dropping behind the rooftops like it wanted to hide from the night. The plant stretched across several acres, a maze of long corridors, silent conveyor belts, and metal walkways hanging high above cracked concrete floors. By the time I walked to the front door, the sky had turned purple. The smell of damp metal and old smoke hung in the air. Inside the security room, I took my flashlight, my key ring, and my radio. The manager had explained earlier that the electricity was unstable and the camera feed sometimes flickered. I thought nothing of it. I was just grateful for work. My first walkthrough was quiet. The floors creaked, but everything in this building creaked. My footsteps echoed long after I stopped walking. The air bounced back every sound twice, as if something was repeating me, learning me. I told myself that was just the acoustics, but a strange unease followed me, walking just behind my shadows. At 9:30 p.m., I returned to the office and filled out a short log. Everything seemed normal. That was the last time the building felt empty. On the second patrol, around 11:19 p.m., I heard something faint near the weaving hall, a low rattling, like chains dragged over metal. For a moment, I thought someone had broken in. I shined my flashlight down the long stretch of machinery. My breath felt stuck in my throat. The hall was empty, but the noise kept going, a rhythm too steady to be accidental. The sound rose slowly until I recognized it, a machine belt turning. I froze. The plant had no power, no electricity, no running mechanisms. The machines had been dead longer than some houses in town had been standing. I took one slow step toward the sound. Each step felt heavier, like the air thickened with every breath I stole. When I reached the first weaving unit, the noise stopped. Not faded, not dimmed, but stopped all at once, as if someone had cut a cord. I whispered into my radio that I heard a possible disturbance, but the static swallowed my voice. When I tried again, the radio clicked dead. A soft hum passed through the hall then, like the building had exhaled. I walked back to the office, my chest tight. I told myself it was the wind moving through old metal. I had to believe that. I needed the job, and fear had already taken too much from me, but the fear was not done. At 12:53 a.m., during my third patrol, I smelled something I had not expected, the sharp scent of burning cotton mixed with hot iron. The weave room had not operated for decades. No cloth had passed through those frames in years. Yet the smell grew stronger as I approached the long lane by the dye vats. I pointed my flashlight toward the far corner, and something moved. A shadow, but not the kind cast by light. It moved with purpose, like a figure working at a station. I blinked hard, thinking my exhaustion was playing tricks on me. But when I lifted the flashlight higher, the shadow shifted again, bending forward, hands reaching toward a machine that had not run since the late 90s. Someone was there. But when I stepped closer, there was nothing. My chest tightened again, but now from something colder. The silence around me felt strained, like it was holding its breath, like something was listening. I hurried back to the office, but something else happened then, something I had no way to rationalize. As I turned into the narrow corridor behind the furnace room, I heard voices. Not whispers, not echoes. Full voices, men calling to each other through thick air. Check the gauge. Hold the line steady. Watch the furnace pressure. The words came clear and sharp, cutting through the dark like they were happening feet away. My pulse slammed inside my ears. The corridor was empty. My flashlight trembled in my hand. York was not a place where ghosts belonged. Or maybe it was. Maybe places like this were built on more than steel and sweat. Maybe they were built on memory too heavy to bury. I had no reason to believe in hauntings until that moment, and even then I told myself the building was playing tricks on the air. But something deeper in me knew better. On my fourth patrol, at 2:17 a.m., the night broke open. I had reached the old furnace yard, a wide chamber with rusted catwalks and a floor stained black from decades of heat. This was where the accident had happened. York locals called it the Pit, a name spoken with a strange mix of sorrow and pride, as if the tragedy made them guardians of something sacred. The air grew warmer as I walked, not a little. A lot. Sweat rolled down my spine. My flashlight beam shook as the temperature rose fast enough to make my eyes sting. Metal pinged like it was expanding. Then I heard it. A low roar, deep and vibrating like a furnace igniting. My heart slammed again. There was no working furnace. No heat source. No power. But the roar grew louder until I felt it in my teeth. I moved closer to the rail. I should have run. I knew it. But something in that room pulled me, like the place had been waiting for me. When I stepped onto the catwalk, I saw them, 7 men standing around the old furnace pit. Their outlines shimmered in waves of heat, but they looked solid, real. Their jackets were thick with soot, their gloves blackened, their boots worn down from shifts long finished. They spoke to one another, none of them noticing me. One man pointed to a pressure valve. Another climbed the ladder to the gauge. A third wiped sweat from his brow. I whispered no. I whispered, please stop. I knew what I was seeing. The accident. The moment before the collapse. A scene trapped in the bones of the building. I tried to step back, but my legs locked. My throat tightened as if invisible hands pressed against it. I wanted to scream to warn them, but no sound came out. The valve wheel spun. The pit glowed. A high, sharp whistle burst through the air. Then came the blast. A white flash swallowed the room, and a force knocked me backward. My body hit metal. Pain shot up my spine. My ears rang until all sound melted into a dull hum. My vision blurred. When I opened my eyes, the room was dark and cold again. The furnace stood silent. The air held no heat. The catwalk behind me was empty. I looked at my watch. It read 3:01 a.m. I had no memory of standing back up. I left the furnace room shaking, each step weaker than the last. When I reached the office, I collapsed into the chair. I stared at the blank walls, trying to understand what had happened. But the truth pressed heavy inside me. York had been waiting for someone to see what it refused to bury. And it had chosen me. Maybe because some places use broken people as mirrors. When morning came, I resigned. The manager tried to convince me to stay. He said others had heard things too, seen things. He said the plant never harmed anyone, but his eyes said something different. His eyes said harmed was a word stretched thin. I walked out knowing I would never step inside that building again. But the story did not end there. 3 weeks later, the plant burned down. Officials said arson, but no one was ever arrested. People in town whispered that the building finally decided to finish its own ending. Some said the old workers wanted release. Others said they wanted revenge. Even now, when you stand near the empty lot on cold nights, you can hear strange things. Chains rattling. Machines humming. Men shouting warnings that never reach the right ears. York pretends it has moved on, but the truth hides in plain sight. A town mistaking depression for loyalty, clinging to ruins because letting go feels like betrayal. A place where ghosts are not stories but citizens. A place that watches the weak, waiting for the moment their guard drops. I have never gone back, I never will. But sometimes, late at night, when the world grows too quiet, I hear that furnace roar again. Not in the air. In my mind. As if the building did not burn. As if it only moved inside me. In the end, the story teaches something heavy but real. Sometimes the places we enter are not dangerous because of ghosts, but because they mirror the parts of ourselves we try to ignore. Marcus walked into that abandoned plant thinking he just needed money, but the truth was he needed escape, and the building knew that before he did. When a person is already breaking, even silence can become a trap. The lesson is that ignoring your pain does not make you strong, and calling your suffering humility does not make it noble. When life pushes you into dark places, you must know when to walk away, because not every place wants to help you heal. Some places want you because you are vulnerable. And the most important truth is this: when you feel like you are losing yourself, leave before the world convinces you that your pain is loyalty. Leave before the darkness convinces you that you belong to it. I always believed the quiet corners of the world hid secrets that nobody wanted to disturb, and growing up in a small Pennsylvania town like State College made that belief feel strangely real. People here apologized for existing too loudly, keeping their lives small and neat, as if drawing too much attention might wake something that preferred silence. My name is Mason, and for as long as I can remember, adventure pulled at me like a restless pulse, urging me to break away from the slow rhythm of this place. The forested edges of town always felt like they were holding their breath, waiting for someone foolish enough to step off the familiar path, and I guess I was always that foolish someone. Back then, my life seemed made of long, calm days, rolling hills, and streets that emptied before the sun even set, and yet all that peace made me feel trapped. As a teen, I searched for anything that felt unpredictable. I slipped into abandoned barns, followed old logging trails, and wandered into dark pockets of forest just to feel my heart race. The quiet made everything echo louder, especially after the world fell apart. When my senior year began, the virus swept through the country, shutting down schools, shops, gatherings, everything. Doors closed, windows locked, sidewalks emptied, and people hid behind masks in fear. It felt like the whole town curled inward, clinging to the hope that stillness alone could keep danger away. For someone like me, all that stillness felt like a cage. The rules faded as adults retreated into their homes, leaving places unwatched and nights unguarded. The fear outside only made curiosity grow stronger inside me. And that was when I started noticing someone else who looked just as uneasy as I felt. Someone who seemed to carry questions she never let herself ask. Her name was Lila. I knew her only in passing before everything closed. A quiet girl who always took the safe route, someone who measured every step with caution. But sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, I saw the same spark of curiosity flickering behind her eyes, a spark she kept hidden to survive. She understood that silence kept her safe, but that silence was wearing thin. One evening after weeks of isolation, I asked her if she wanted to get out for a while, just to breathe air that didn't smell like disinfectant. I expected her to say no. Instead, after a long hesitation, she agreed. Maybe she was tired of being careful. Maybe the quiet had become too loud. Or maybe she sensed something in me that made her trust me more than she should have. State College sits near long stretches of heavy woods, and one of those places was Ridgewood Park, an old forest preserve on the edge of town that most people already avoided even before the lockdown. Sometimes rumors replaced facts here, spreading faster than truth, because truth didn't matter when fear was easier. People said the trees grew too close together, that animals avoided the deepest part, that strange sounds drifted through the branches at night. No one ever confirmed those rumors, but no one bothered to deny them either. Just after midnight, we left my car near the empty entrance and stepped into the cool darkness with only headlamps to guide us. Lila stayed close, stiff with nerves, her gaze flicking from shadow to shadow as though the night itself might reach for her. I kept telling her everything was fine, trying to lighten the tension, but she didn't relax. The silence felt heavy, as though the entire forest held its breath, waiting. As we walked deeper, the world seemed to shrink around us, the air turning still, the usual rustle of leaves fading until even our footsteps sounded too loud. Every time Lila glanced behind us, the motion made my stomach tighten, but I forced myself to smile and act like nothing felt wrong. A strange awareness prickled along my spine, but I shrugged it off. I had always wanted excitement, and now it felt close enough to touch. After about 30 minutes, a narrow trail appeared on my left. It branched off from the main path, barely visible beneath old brush. I recognized it from past wanderings, a shortcut that looped back toward the parking lot. I wanted to impress Lila with a hidden path that only regular explorers knew. When I suggested we take it, she hesitated, staring into the thick shadows, but she trusted me enough to nod. The moment we stepped onto that thin trail, the air shifted, like the forest became aware of us. Then I heard something faint drifting between the branches, so soft at first I thought it was the wind. But the longer we walked, the clearer it grew. A quiet melody, light and slow, almost mournful, as if someone played a flute far away, yet close enough for the sound to slide beneath the trees. The notes curled through the darkness in a pattern that didn't feel human, rising and falling in a rhythm that tugged at the edges of my mind. Lila froze. Her voice barely rose above a whisper as she asked if I was hearing it too. I nodded, though I wished I didn't. The sound wrapped around us from every direction, as if the forest itself carried the melody. The more I listened, the more wrong it felt, like each note carried something it shouldn't, something cold and old and patient. I tried to brush it off, insisting maybe someone was out here playing music, but even as I said it, I felt how empty my words were. No cars in the lot. No campers. No lights. No reason for anyone to be near this part of the woods, and yet the music kept drifting toward us. Lila's fingers tightened around my arm until her nails dug into my skin. The fear on her face made something inside me unravel. She whispered that we needed to leave right away, that something wasn't right. I finally listened. We turned back toward the main path, walking faster as the flute notes shifted, becoming sharper, almost playful, twisting into something that felt like laughter without a voice. That was when the bushes beside us shook. The sound wasn't small like an animal. It was heavy, deliberate, pushing through branches with force. I swung my headlamp toward the noise, and for a moment the beam caught something moving between the trees. A dark shape slid across the trail too fast for my eyes to fully understand. It was bigger than a deer, lower to the ground, and it moved in a way that made my breath stop. Lila choked on a gasp and clung to me. The fear in her eyes mirrored the fear rising in my chest. The entire forest seemed to lean closer, listening. Before we could speak, we heard the rustling again, this time on the other side of us, then behind us, then above us, like something circling. The music rose, wild and broken, no longer gentle but frantic, mocking, pressing into our ears until my pulse began to race. I grabbed Lila's hand, and we bolted down the trail, branches slapping our arms, breath tearing through our throats. The melody followed, weaving through the trees with impossible clarity, as if whoever played it was right beside us, invisible but watching. Every step felt heavier than the last. Every shadow looked ready to reach for us. I kept expecting that dark shape to appear again, to block the path, to pull us into the trees where no one would ever find us. When our feet hit the main trail, we didn't stop. The forest opened slightly, but the sense of being hunted only grew stronger. The clearing where the parking lot waited felt like a distant dream we might never reach. My lungs burned, my legs shook, but I didn't slow down. Neither did Lila. The tune sharpened behind us, turning into wild, uneven bursts that felt almost angry. Something in the woods didn't want us leaving. Finally, the parking lot came into view, my car sitting alone under the dim glow of the streetlight like a lifeline. We sprinted toward it, hands fumbling for the handles, yanking the doors open, slamming them shut as though a thin layer of metal could stop whatever lived out there. The music faded at last, slipping back into the forest like it had never existed, but the silence it left felt even worse. We sat inside, gasping for air, staring out at the tree line. The darkness between the trunks felt deeper than before, almost alive. Lila shook uncontrollably, whispering that something had followed us, that it was still out there waiting. I placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to calm her and myself, telling both of us it was over, that we were safe now, even though I felt the opposite. A cold feeling settled in my bones, a certainty that the forest hadn't just watched us, it had chosen to let us leave. And now that we had heard that sound, now that the melody had wound its way into our minds, I knew it wouldn't ever fully stop. The haunting tune echoed faintly in the back of my thoughts, drifting through the dark corners of memory like it had claimed a place inside me. Some people say the deepest fear comes not from what is seen, but from what chooses not to reveal itself. That night proved it. I still hear the flute sometimes when I close my eyes, soft at first, then rising, swirling, laughing, reminding me that not everything in these quiet towns sleeps peacefully. Some old things linger where the trees grow close and the shadows have their own patience, waiting for someone curious enough to wander too far. And when I think about Ridgewood Park and the silence that swallowed us that night, I understand something I never did before. A man sees how quickly rumors replace real truth when the real truth becomes something too dangerous to face. A town learns to whisper instead of speak. A woman learns her silence keeps her safe. But me, I learned that some melodies never leave once they find you. Sometimes the scariest things are not the shadows hiding in the trees, but the moments we convince ourselves that nothing bad can happen just because the world feels quiet. Curiosity is a gift, but it becomes dangerous when we ignore the warnings our heart tries to give us. There are places in life where silence means safety, and there are paths we should never walk just to feel brave. In the end, danger doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, just enough for us to step closer, and by the time we finally listen, we are already too far inside the darkness. The lesson is simple. Respect the unknown, listen when fear speaks, and never assume the world is empty just because you can't see what's watching.